Alright, this is chapter 12 of Twilight. We're doing an earlier start today. As you can see, it's actually daylight behind me. Chapter 12 is called Balancing. Billy, Charlie called as soon as he got out of the car. I turned toward the house, beckoning to Jacob as I ducked under the porch. I heard Charlie greeting them loudly behind me. "I'm going to pretend I didn't see you behind the wheel, Jake," Charlie said disapprovingly. "We get permits early on the Reyes," Jacob said while I unlocked the door and flicked on the porch light. "Sure you do," Charlie laughed. "I gotta get around somehow." I recognized Billy's resonant voice easily, despite the years. The sound of his voice made me feel suddenly younger, like a child. I went inside, leaving the door open behind me and turning on the lights before I hung up my jacket. Then I stood in the door watching anxiously as Charlie and Jacob helped Billy out of the car and into his wheelchair.
Bella is a child. Isn't she like just 16?
Yeah, Bella's a child. But when you're a teenager, you're like, I'm an adult.
I guess so. Adolescence.
I backed out of the way as the three of them hurried in, shaking off the rain. "This is a surprise," Charlie was saying. "It's been too long," Billy answered. "I hope it's not a bad time." His dark eyes flashed up to me again, their expression unreadable. "No, it's great. I hope you can stay for the game." Jacob grinned. "I think that's the plan. Our TV broke last week." Billy made a face at his son. "And of course, Jacob was anxious to see Bella again," he added. Jacob scowled and ducked his head while I fought back a surge of remorse. Maybe I'd been too convincing on the beach. "Are you hungry?" I asked, turning toward the kitchen. I was eager to escape Billy's searching gaze. "Nah, we ate just before we came," Jacob answered. "How about you, Charlie?" I called over my shoulder as I fled around the corner. "Sure," he replied.
Why is she running?
His voice, I don't, because Billy's like staring her down. Because they saw her with Edward in her car.
Oh, I guess that's true.
"Sure," Charlie replied, his voice moving in the distance of the front room and the TV. I could hear Billy's chair following. The grilled cheese sandwiches were in the frying pan. And I was slicing up a tomato when I sensed someone behind me. Is she putting tomato on her grilled cheese?
That's a thing.
That's a thing?
Grilled cheese and tomato soup.
I guess so. Yeah. I don't know. It sounds gross.
I think it's gross, but you know.
"So, how are things?" Jacob asked. "Pretty good," I smiled. His enthusiasm was hard to resist. "How about you? Did you finish your car?" "Nah," he frowned. "I still need parts. We borrowed that one." He pointed with his thumb into the direction of the front yard. "Sorry, I haven't seen any. What was it you were looking for?" "A master cylinder," he grinned. "Something wrong with the truck?" he asked suddenly. "No?" "Oh, I just wondered because you weren't driving it." I stared down at the pan, pulling at the edge of the sandwich to check the bottom side. "I got a ride with a friend." "Nice ride." Jacob's voice was admiring. I didn't recognize the driver, though. I thought I knew most of the kids around here. I nodded non-committedly, keeping my eyes down as I flipped the sandwiches. "My dad seemed to know him from somewhere." "Jacob, could you hand me some plates? They're in the cupboard over the sink." "Sure." He got the plates in silence. I hope he had let it drop now. "So who was it?" he asked, setting 2 plates on the counter next to me. I sighed in defeat. "Edward Cullen."
Why wouldn't you just lie?
Yeah.
Just be like, Eduardo.
"It's Eduardo. You wouldn't know him. He's from Spain."
He's a transfer student.
To my surprise, Jacob laughed. I glanced up at him, and he looked a little embarrassed. "Guess that explains it then. I wondered why my dad was acting so strange." "That's right," I faked an innocent expression. "He doesn't like the Cullens." "He's a superstitious old man," Jacob muttered under his breath. "You don't think he'd say anything to Charlie?" I couldn't help asking, the words coming out in a low rush.
I don't understand. Why is it a secret?
Jacob stared at me for a moment. I couldn't read the expression in his dark eyes. "I doubt it," he finally answered. "I think Charlie chewed him out pretty good last time. They haven't spoken much since. Tonight's sort of a reunion, I think. I don't think he'd bring it up again anyway." "Oh," I said, trying to sound indifferent. I stayed in the front room after I carried the food out to Charlie, pretending to watch the game while Jacob chattered at me. I was really listening to the men's conversation, though, watching for any sign that Billy was about to rat me out, trying to think of ways to stop him if he began. It was a long night. I had a lot of homework that was going undone, but I was afraid to leave Billy alone with Charlie. Finally, the game ended.
What if she just shoved Billy over? Like, have you started talking?
Big Lebowski style. This man can walk. And Bella just shoves him out of the chair.
Bella, what are you doing?
I've seen a lot in my time. Are you and your friends coming back to the beach soon? Jacob asked as he pushed his father over the lip of the threshold. Goodbye, Billy. I'm not sure, I hedged. That was fun, Charlie, Billy said. Come up for the next game, Charlie encouraged. Sure,
it's
Billy
already
said.
done.
Yeah, the game's over. He's leaving.
God.
We'll be here. Have a good night. His eyes shifted to mine and his smile disappeared. You take care, Bella.
Oh.
He added seriously.
Why are you threatening my child?
Thank you, I muttered, looking away. I headed for the stairs while Charlie waved in the doorway. Wait, Bella, he said. I cringed. Had Billy gotten something in before I joined them in the living room? But Charlie was relaxed, still grinning from the unexpected visit. I didn't get a chance to talk to you tonight. How was your day? Oh, good. I hesitated with one foot on the first stairs, searching for details that I could safely share. My badminton team won all 4 games. Oh, wow, I didn't know you could play badminton. Well, actually, I can't, but my partner is really good. Who is it? He asked with a token interest. Mike Newton? I told him reluctantly. Oh, yeah, you said you were friends with the Newton kid. He perked up. Nice family. He mused for a minute. Why didn't you ask him to the dance for the weekend? Dad, I groaned. He's kinda dating my friend Jessica. Besides, you know I can't dance.
After you set them up.
Yeah. Oh, right, he muttered. Then he smiled at me apologetically. So I guess it's good you'll be gone Saturday. I've made plans to go fishing with the guys from the station. The weather's supposed to be real warm, but if you wanted to put your trip off till someone could go with you, I'd stay home. I know I leave you here alone too much. Dad, you're doing a great job, I smiled, hoping my relief didn't show. I never minded being alone. I'm too much like you. I winked at him, and he smiled his crinkly-eyed smile.
Aw.
That's a nice moment, finally.
Except she's manipulating.
That's true. I slept better that night, too tired to dream. When I woke to a pearl gray morning, my mood was blissful. The tense evening with Billy and Jacob seemed harmless enough now. I decided to forget it completely. I caught myself whistling while I was pulling the front part of my hair into a beret. And later again as I skipped down the stairs. This is too much, Bella. You're cheerful this morning, Charlie commented over breakfast. I shrugged. It's Friday. I hurried so I would be ready to go the second Charlie left. I had my bag ready, shoes on, teeth brushed, but even though I rushed to the door as soon as I was sure Charlie would be out of sight, Edward was faster. He was waiting in his shiny car, windows down, engine off. I didn't hesitate this time, climbing in the passenger side quickly, the sooner to see his face. He grinned his crooked smile at me, stopping my breath and my heart. I couldn't imagine how an angel could be any more glorious. There was nothing about him that could be improved upon. How did you sleep? He asked. I wondered if he had any idea how appealing his voice was. Fine. How was your night? It was pleasant. His smile was amused.
I watched you sleep.
I felt like I was missing an inside joke. Can I ask what you did? I asked. No. He grinned. Today is still mine. He wanted to know about people today. More about Renee, her hobbies, what we'd done in our free time together, and then the one grandmother I'd known, my few school friends, embarrassing me when he asked about boys I'd dated. I was relieved that I never really dated anyone, so that particular conversation didn't last long. He seemed as surprised as Jessica and Angela by my laid-back, romantic history. So, you never met anyone that you've wanted? He asked in a serious tone that made me wonder what he was thinking.
That's a weird way of putting it.
I was grudgingly honest. Not in Phoenix. His lips pressed together in a hard line. We were in the cafeteria at this point. The day had sped by in a blur that was rapidly becoming routine. I took advantage of his brief pause to take a bite of my bagel. I should have let you drive yourself today, he answered, apropos of nothing while I chewed. Why? I demanded. I'm leaving with Alice after lunch. Oh. I blinked, bewildered and disappointed. That's okay. It's not that far of a walk, I guess. He frowned at me impatiently. I'm not going to make you walk home. We'll go get your truck and leave it here for you. I don't have my keys with me, I sighed. I really don't mind walking. What I minded was losing my time with him. He shook his head. Your truck will be here, and the key will be in the ignition. Unless you're afraid someone might steal it. He laughed at the thoughts. Alright, I agreed, pursing my lips. I was pretty sure my key was in the pocket of my pair of jeans I wore Wednesday, under a pile of clothes in the laundry room. Even if he broke into my house or whatever he was planning, he'd never find it. He seemed to feel the challenge of my consent. He smirked overconfident. So, where are you going? I asked as casually as I could manage. Hunting, he answered grimly. If I'm going to be alone with you tomorrow, I'm going to take whatever precautions I can. His face grew morose and pleading.
Can you not be so weird?
You know you can always cancel. I looked down, afraid of the persuasive power of his eyes. I refused to be convinced to fear him, no matter how real the danger might be. It doesn't matter, I repeated in my head. No, I whispered, glancing back at his face. I can't. Perhaps you're right, he murmured bleakly. His eyes seemed to darken in color as I watched. I changed the subject. What time will I see you tomorrow? I asked, already depressed by the thought of him leaving now. That depends. It's a Saturday. Don't you want to sleep in? He offered. No, I answered too fast. He restrained a smile. The same time as usual, then. Will Charlie be there? No, he's fishing tomorrow. I beamed at the memory of how conveniently things had worked out. His voice turned sharp. And if you don't come home, what will he think? I have no idea, I answered coolly. He knows I've been meaning to do the laundry. Maybe he'll think I fell in the washer. Edward scowled at me, and I scowled back. His anger was much more impressive than mine.
I don't understand why he's mad.
They're just both.
Stop being mad all the time.
They're just both always mad. What are you hunting tonight? I asked when I was sure I lost the glowering contest. Whatever we find in the park, we aren't going far. He seemed bemused by my casual reference to his secret realities. Why are you going with Alice? I asked.
Because she's also a vampire?
Alice is the most supportive. He frowned as he spoke. And the others? I asked timidly. What are they? His brow puckered for a brief moment.
What?
Incredulous, for the most part. I peeked quickly behind me at his family. They sat staring off in different directions, exactly the same as the first time I'd seen them. Only now there were four. Their beautiful bronze-haired brother sat across from me, his golden eyes troubled. They don't like me, I guessed. That's not it. He disagreed, but his eyes were too innocent. They don't understand why I can't leave you alone. I grimaced. Neither do I, for that matter. Edward shook his head slowly, rolling his eyes towards the ceiling before he met my gaze again. I told you. You don't see yourself clearly at all. You're not like anyone I've ever known. You fascinate me. I glared at him, sure he had to be teasing by now. He smiled as he deciphered my expression. Having the advantages I do, he murmured, touching his forehead discreetly. I have a better than average grasp of human nature. People are predictable, but you never do what I expect. You always take me by surprise. What is she doing that's so unpredictable?
Yeah, also, like, she never does anything, first of all. And, like, second of all, it's not that people are predictable if you can read exactly what they're going to do.
I looked away, my eyes wandering back to his family, embarrassed and dissatisfied. His words made me feel like a science experiment. I wanted to laugh at myself for expecting anything else. That part is easy enough to explain, he continued. I felt his eyes on my face, but I couldn't look at him yet, afraid he might read the chagrin in my eyes. But there's more, and it's not so easy to put into words. I was still staring at the Collins while he spoke.
Really?
Suddenly, Rosalie...
They always smell like strawberries. I want to eat you up.
She's like, God, I'm the only one in this town that shampoos my hair, I don't know. Suddenly, Rosalie, his blonde and breathtaking sister, turned to look at me. No.
Blonde and breathtaking sister.
Not to look. To glare, with dark, cold eyes. I wanted to look away, but her gaze held me until Edward broke off mid-sentence and made an angry noise under his breath. It was almost a hiss. You're like a cat. Rosalie turned her head, and I was relieved to be free. I looked back at Edward, and I knew he could see the confusion and fear had widened my eyes. His face was tight as he explained. I'm sorry about that. She's just worried. You see, it's dangerous for more than just me. If, after spending so much time with you, so publicly, he looked down, if this ends badly. He dropped his head into his hands as he had the same night in Port Angeles. His anguish was plain. I yearned to comfort him, but I was at a loss of how. My hand reached towards him involuntarily. Quickly, though, I dropped it to the table, fearing that my touch would only make things worse. I realized slowly that his words should frighten me. I waited for the fear to come, but all I could seem to feel was an ache for his pain. And frustration. Frustration that Rosalie had interrupted whatever he was about to say. I didn't know how to bring it up again. He still had his head in his hands. I tried to speak in a normal voice. And you have to leave now? Yes. He raised his face. It was serious for a moment, and then his mood shifted and he smiled. It's probably for the best. We still have 15 minutes of what wretched movie left to endure in biology. I don't think I could take any more. I started. Alice, her short, inky hair in a halo of spiky disarray around her exquisite elfin face, was suddenly standing behind his shoulder. Her slight frame was willowy, graceful even in absolute stillness. He greeted her without looking away from me. Alice. Edward, she answered, her high soprano voice. I cannot do high soprano. Oh, Edward! As almost attractive as his. Alice, Bella. Bella, Alice. Almost as attractive as his. Edward!
Edward!
He introduced, gesturing casually with his hand, a wry smile on his face. Hello, Bella. Her brilliant obsidian eyes were unreadable.
God, she's gorgeous.
Her smile was friendly. It's nice to finally meet you. Edward flashed a dark look at her. Hi, Alice, I murmured shyly. Are you ready? She asked Edward. His voice was aloof. Nearly. I'll meet you at the car. My throat's gonna die. She left another word. Her walk was so fluid, so sinuous that I felt a sharp pain of jealousy. Should I say, have fun, or is that the wrong sentiment? I asked, turning back to him. No, have fun works as well as anything. He grinned. Have fun, then. I worked to sound wholehearted. Of course I didn't fool him. I'll try. He grinned. And you try to be safe, please. Safe in Forks? What a challenge. For you, it is a challenge. His jaw hardened. Promise me. I promise to try to be safe. I recited, I'll do the laundry tonight. That ought to be fraught with peril. Don't fall in. He mocked. I'll do my best. He stood then and I rose too. I'll see you tomorrow.
I guess.
It seems like a long time to you, doesn't it? He mused. I nodded glumly. I'll be there in the morning. He promised, smiling his crooked smile. He reached across the table to touch my face, lightly brushing along my cheekbone again. Then he turned and walked away. I stared at him until he was gone. I was sorely tempted to ditch the rest of the day, at least Jim, but a warning instinct stopped me. I knew that if I disappeared now, Mike and others would assume I was with Edward, and Edward was worried about the time we'd spent together publicly. If things went wrong, I refused to dwell on that last thought, concentrating instead on making things safer for him. I intuitively knew, and sensed he did too, that tomorrow would be pivotal. Our relationship couldn't continue to balance as it did on the point of a knife. We would fall off one edge or the other, depending entirely upon his decision or his instincts. My decision was made before I had consciously chosen, and I was committed to seeing it through, because there is nothing more terrifying to me, more excruciating, than the thought of turning away from him. It was an impossibility. I went to class feeling dutiful. I couldn't honestly say what happened in biology, for my mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of tomorrow.
I hope there's not a quiz on this fucking movie.
Bill! In gym, Mike was speaking to me again. He wished it was a good time in Seattle, and I carefully explained that I'd canceled my trip, worried about my truck. Oh, so are you going to the dance with Colin? He asked, suddenly sulky. No, I'm not going to the dance at all. What are you doing then? He asked, too interested. My natural urge was to tell him to butt out, but instead I lied brightly. Laundry, and then I have to study for a trig test, or I'm going to fail. Is Edward helping you study? Edward, I emphasized, is not going to help me study. He's going away somewhere for the weekend. The lies came more naturally than usual, I noted with surprise. Oh, Mike perked up. You know, you could always come to the dance with our group anyway. That'd be cool. We'd all dance with you, he promised. The mental image of Jessica's face made my tone sharper than necessary. I'm not going to the dance, Mike. Fine, he sulked again. I was just offering. When the school day had finally ended,
why are you so mean?
I walked to the parking lot without enthusiasm. I did not especially want to walk home, but I couldn't see how he would have retrieved my truck. Then again, I was starting to believe that nothing was impossible for him. The latter instinct proved correct. My truck sat in the same space he'd parked his Volvo this morning. I shook my head, incredulous, as I opened the unlocked door and saw the key in the ignition. There was a piece of white paper folded on my seat. I got in and closed the door before I unfolded it. He could have put the keys, like, under her mat, like, in the
thing.
In the
ignition, though.
Yeah.
And, like, it's so shitty, because he was like, unless you're afraid someone will steal
And it's
your
like, that's
piece of
not
shit car.
irrational.
Yeah.
Like, two words.
Like, it's not that shitty, you piece of fucking garbage.
2 words were written on the folded paper in elegant script. Be safe. Why don't they
Also,
just
it's
text?
like, don't be impressed by him. He broke into your house.
The sound of the truck roaring to life frightened me, and I laughed at myself. Bella's just constantly peeing her pants.
Yeah.
When I got home, the handle of the door was locked, the deadbolt unlocked, just as I left it this morning. Inside, I went straight to the laundry room. I looked just the same as it had left too. I dug for my jeans, and after finding them, checked the pockets. Empty. Maybe I had hung the keys up after all, I thought, shaking my head.
Been empty though, and Edward just had a copy of
Like,
the keys.
that's kind of what I half anticipated, was that he just made a spare key, like, broke into her house when she was asleep.
Well, he does.
Yeah, and then just, like, took her key and, like, copied it. Following the same instinct that had prompted me to lie to Mike, I called Jessica on the pretense of wishing her luck at the dance. When she offered the same wish for my day with Edward, I told her about the cancellation. She was more disappointed than really necessary for a third-party observer to be. I said goodbye quickly after that.
She's your friend. She's sad for you.
Charlie was absent-minded at dinner, worried over something at work, I guess, or maybe a basketball game, or maybe he just really was enjoying the lasagna. It was hard to tell with Charlie. You know, Dad, I began breaking into his reverie. What's that, Belle? I think you're right about Seattle. I think I'll wait until Jessica or someone else can go with me. Oh, he said, surprised. Oh, okay. Do you want me to stay home and cancel my fishing trip? No, Dad, don't change your plans. I've got a million things to do. Homework, laundry, I need to go to the library and the grocery store. I'll be in and out all day. You go and have fun. Are you sure? Absolutely, Dad. Besides, the freezer is getting dangerously low on fish. We're down to 2, maybe 3 years' supply. You're sure easy to live with, Bella. He smiled. I could say the same thing about you, I said, laughing. The sound of my laughter was off, but he didn't seem to notice. I felt so guilty for deceiving him that I almost took Edward's advice and told him where I would be. Almost. After dinner, I folded clothes and moved another load through the dryer. Unfortunately, it was the kind of job that only keeps hands busy, for my mind definitely had too much free time, and it was getting out of control. I fluctuated between anticipation so intense that it was nearly painful, and an insidious fear that picked at my resolve. I had to keep reminding myself that I'd made my choice, and I wasn't going back on it. I pulled his note out of my pocket much more often than necessary to absorb the 2 small words he had written. He wants me to be safe, I told myself again and again. I would just hold on to the faith that in the end, that desire would win out over the others. And what was my other choice? To cut him out of my life? Intolerable. Besides, since I'd come to Forks, I really seemed like my life was now about him. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind worried, wondering if it hurt very much. What if it did end badly? I was relieved when it was late enough to be acceptable for bedtime. I knew I was far too stressed to sleep, so I did something I'd never done before. I deliberately took unnecessary cold medicine. I thought I was going to be masturbating, and I don't know why.
Me too.
Like, I
just immediately where my mind went, I was like, oh, she fucking cracked it, finally.
I absolutely thought she was going to be like, I took out the vibrator given to me years ago.
I mean, she probably should, though, and then she wouldn't be so fucking
That's
crazy.
true. Bella needs some post-nut clarity.
Yeah.
I deliberately took unnecessary cold medicine. The kind that knocked me out for a good 8 hours.
Oh god, the criminal.
So edgy, Bella. I normally wouldn't condone that type of behavior in myself. But but tomorrow would be complicated enough without me being loopy from sleep deprivation on top of everything else. It's like the most fucking innocent thing.
I took cold medicine and I didn't even have a cold.
It wasn't even like, oh, I lit up a joint. Or like, I broke into Charlie's alcohol cabinet. Like, I took some NyQuil. Oh no, I turned on my blood pressure.
Oh no.
Okay. While I waited for the drugs to kick in, I dry cleaned my hair till it was impeccably straight.
To kick in.
and fussed over what I would
That's
wear
what it calls
tomorrow. With everything ready for the morning, I finally laid in my bed. I felt hyper. I couldn't stop twitching. Bella, you took the wrong drugs! Oh no! Damn childproof caps!
I started cocaine on accident.
I got up and rifled through my shoebox of CDs until I found a collection of Chopin's Nocturnes.
Oh, God.
I put that on very quietly and lay down again. You can tell this is written by some, like, old grandma. Like, Stephanie's, like, 70 years old.
Oh, waiting for the drugs to kick in.
And put on some Chopin's Nocturnes. Somewhere in the middle of that exercise, the cold pills took their effect, and I gladly sank into unconsciousness. I woke early, having slept soundly and dreamlessly thanks to my gratuitous drug use.
Oh my God.
Though I was well rested, I slipped
Take, like, the whole bottle.
She took like one. She didn't even take like the full recommended dose. I slipped right back into the same hectic frenzy from the night before. I dressed in a rush, smoothing my collar against my neck, fidgeting with the tan sweater till it hung right over my jeans. I sneaked a swift look out the window to see that Charlie was already gone. A thin, cottony layer of clouds veiled against the sky. They didn't look very lasting. I ate breakfast without tasting the food, hurrying to clean up when I was done. I peeked out the window again, but nothing had changed. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was heading back downstairs when a quiet knock sent my heart thudding against my ribcage. I flew to the door. I had a little trouble with the simple deadbolt, but I yanked the door open at last, and there he was. All the agitation dissolved as soon as I saw his face, calm taking its place. I breathed a sigh of relief. Yesterday's fears seemed very foolish with him here. He wasn't smiling at first. His face was somber, but then his expression lightened as he looked me over and he laughed. "Good morning," he chuckled. "What's wrong?" I glanced down to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important, like shoes or pants. "We match." He laughed again. I realized he had a long, light tan sweater on with a white collar showing underneath, and blue jeans. I laughed with him, hiding a secret twinge of regret. Why did he have to look like a runway model when I couldn't? I locked the door behind me while we walked to the truck. He waited by the passenger door with a martyred expression that was easy to understand. "We made a deal," I reminded him smugly, climbing into the driver's seat and reached over to unlock his door. "Where to?" I asked. "Put your seatbelt on, I'm already nervous." I gave him a dirty look as I complied. "Where to?" I repeated with a sigh. "Take the 101 north," he ordered. It was surprisingly difficult to concentrate on the road while feeling his gaze on my face. I compensated by driving more carefully than usual through the still sleeping town. "Were you planning to make it out of Forks before nightfall?" "This truck is old enough to be your car's grandmother. Have some respect," I retorted. We were soon out of town limits despite his negativity. Thick underbrush and green-swathed trunks replaced the lawns and houses. "Turn right on the 110, he instructed, just as I was about to ask. I obeyed silently. Now we drive until the pavement ends. I could hear a smile in his voice, but I was too afraid of driving off the road and proving him right to look and be sure. "And what's there, at the pavement's end?" I wondered. "A trail. We're hiking? Thank goodness I'd worn tennis shoes. Is that a
It's a scene.
Is that a problem?" He sounded as if he expected as much. "No," I tried to make the lie sound confident, but if he thought my truck was slow. "Don't worry, it's only 5 miles or so, and we're in no hurry." 5 miles? I didn't answer so that he wouldn't hear my voice crack in panic. 5 miles of treacherous roots and loose stones, trying to twist my ankles or otherwise incapacitate me? This was going to be humiliating. We drove in silence for a while as I contemplated the upcoming horror. "What are you thinking?" he asked impatiently after a few moments. I lied again. "Just wondering where we're going. It's a place I like to go to when the weather's nice." We both glanced out the windows at the thinning clouds as he spoke. "Charlie said it would be warm today." "And did you tell Charlie what you would be up to?" he asked. No. "But Jessica thinks we're going to Seattle together." He seemed cheered by the idea. "No, I told her you canceled on me, which is true." "No one knows you're with me?" Angrily, he said. "That depends. I assume you told Alice." "That's very helpful, Bella," he snapped. I pretended I didn't hear that. "Are you so depressed by Forks that it's made you suicidal?" he demanded when I ignored him.
You are so cringe.
"You said it might cause trouble for you. Us being together publicly," I reminded him. "So you're worried about the trouble it might cause me if you don't come home?" His voice was still angrily and bitingly sarcastic. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. He muttered something under his breath, speaking so quietly that I couldn't understand. We were silent for the rest of the drive. I could feel waves of infuriated disapproval rolling off of him, and I could think of nothing to say. And then the road ended, constricting to a thin-foot trail with a small wooden marker. I parked on the narrow shoulder and stepped out, afraid because he was angry with me, and I didn't have a driving as an excuse to not look at him. It was warm now, warmer than it had been in Forks since the day I'd arrived, almost muggy under the clouds. I pulled off my sweater and knotted it around my waist, glad that I'd worn light sleeveless shirt underneath, especially if I had 5 miles of hiking ahead of me. I heard the door slam, and looked over to see that he'd removed his sweater too. He was facing away from me into the unbroken forest beside my truck. "This way," he said, glancing over his shoulder at me, eyes still annoyed. He stared into the dark of the forest. "The trail?" Panic was clear in my voice as I hurried around the truck to catch up to him. I said there was a trail at the end of the road, not that we're taking it. "No trail?" I asked desperately. "I won't get you lost." He turned then with a mocking smile.
Edward, she is clumsy and has no stamina.
Also, people don't just, like, that never exercise. They're like, oh, 5-mile hike through the woods? Yeah. Yay! His white shirt was sleeveless, and he wore it unbuttoned so that the smooth white skin of his throat flowed uninterrupted over the marble contours of his chest.
She can't even handle PE.
His perfect musculature no longer merely hinted at being concealed behind clothes. He was too perfect, I realized with a piercing stab of despair. There was no way this godlike creature could be meant for me. He stared at me, bewildered by my tortured expression. "Do you want to go home?" he said quietly, a different pain than mine saturating his voice. "No." I walked forward till I was close beside him, anxious not to waste 1 second of whatever time I might have with him. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm not a good hiker," I answered dully. "You'll have to be very patient." "I can be patient, if I make a great effort." He smiled, holding my glance, trying to lift me out of my sudden unexplained dejection. I tried to smile back, but the smile was unconvincing. He scrutinized my face. "I'll just take you home," he promised. I couldn't tell if the promise was unconditional or restricted to an immediate departure. I knew he thought it was fear that upset me, and I was grateful again that I was the one person whose mind he couldn't read. "If you want me to hack 5 miles through the jungle before sundown, you better start leading the way," I said acidly. He frowned at me, struggling to understand my tone and expression. He gave up after a moment and led way into the forest.
What's hilarious is that if Edward could read her mind, he'd probably be so bored of her.
Yeah.
Because she's literally just thirsty.
It's just constantly like, ha, 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 oh god.
Edward's so hot.
It wasn't as hard as I feared. The way was mostly flat, and he held the damp ferns and webs of moss aside for me. So he's just filthy. When his straight path took us over fallen trees and boulders, he would help me, lifting me by the elbow and then releasing me instantly when I was clear. His cold touch on my skin never failed to make my heart thud erratically. Twice when that happened, I caught a look on his face that made sure he could somehow hear it. I tried to keep my eyes away from his perfection as much as possible.
Her dying, and he's like, "Fuck it, we're still hiking."
Nice. But I slipped often. Each time his beauty pierced me, through me with sadness. For the most part, we walked in silence. Occasionally, he would ask me a random question that I hadn't gotten to in the past 2 days of interrogation. He asked about my birthdays, my grade school teachers, my childhood pets, and I had to admit that after killing 3 fish in a row, I'd given up on the whole institution. He laughed at that, louder than I was used to, bell-like echoes bouncing back to us from the empty woods. The hike took most of the morning, but he never showed any sign of impatience. The forest spread out again around us in a boundless labyrinth of ancient trees, and I began to be nervous that we would never find our way out again. But he was perfectly at ease, comfortable in the green maze, never seeming to feel any doubt about our direction. After several hours, the light that filtered through the canopy transformed, the murky olive tone shifting to a brighter jade. The day had turned sunny just as he foretold. For the first time since we entered the woods, I felt a thrill of excitement, which quickly turned to impatience. "Are we there yet?" I teased, pretending to scowl. "Nearly." He smiled at the change in my mood. "Do you see the brightness ahead?" I peered into the thick forest. Should I?" He smirked. "Maybe it's a bit too soon. For your eyes." "Time to visit an optometrist," I muttered. His smirk grew more pronounced. But then, after another 100 yards, I could definitely see a light at the end of the trees.
Just tell him he has monster eyes and watch him get sad.
A glow that was yellow instead of green. I picked up my pace, my eagerness growing with every step. He let me lead now, following noiselessly. I reached the edge of the pool of light and stepped through the last fringe of ferns into the loveliest place I'd ever seen. The meadow was small, perfectly round, and filled with wildflowers. Violet, yellow, and soft white. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the bubbling music of a stream. The sun was directly overhead, filling the circle with a haze of buttery sunshine. Buttery. I walked slowly, awestruck, through the soft grass, swaying flowers and warm, gilded air. I was halfway turned, wanting to share this with him, but he wasn't behind me where I thought he'd be. I spun around, searching for him with sudden alarm. Finally, I spotted him, still under the dense shade of the canopy at the edge of the hollow, watching me with cautious eyes. Only then did I remember what a beauty of the meadow had been driven from my mind. The enigma of Edward and the sun, which he promised to illustrate for me today. I took a step back towards him, my eyes alight with curiosity. His eyes were wary, reluctant. I smiled encouragingly and beckoned to him with my hand, taking another step back. He held up a hand in warning, and I hesitated, rocking back onto my heels. Edward seemed to take a deep breath, and then he stepped out into the bright glow of the midday sun. And that is actually the end of chapter 12. What a cliffhanger!
He sparkles.